The experiment began with a simple, daunting premise: survive for 30 days in a sprawling, high-cost metropolis. I stood on the street corner, clutching my meager paycheck, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. As the clock started, the initial optimism of the challenge quickly evaporated against the harsh urban reality. The towering skyscrapers seemed to lean in, casting long, cold shadows over my very first morning alone. Rent consumed nearly 80% of the meager paycheck, leaving a pittance for food and daily transportation. I stared at the remaining coins in my palm, realizing how quickly they would vanish into thin air. Every morning became a strategic calculation of calories versus cost, weighing every single item on the shelf. A loaf of bread or a carton of milk felt like a luxury I could barely afford today. Every commute turned into a grueling test of patience on the crowded, rattling public transit system daily. I squeezed into the packed subway car, surrounded by tired faces reflecting my own growing, silent exhaustion. The isolation of poverty began to set in, stripping away the social luxuries that once seemed mundane. I walked past vibrant cafes, smelling fresh coffee, but kept my head down to avoid the temptation. The city, previously a playground of opportunity, transformed into a cold, indifferent landscape of constant, quiet survival. Neon lights flickered above, illuminating the damp pavement while I calculated the cost of my next meal. As the first 2 weeks bled into the third, the physical toll began to show on me. My clothes felt looser, and my steps grew heavier as the hunger gnawed at my tired resolve. The mental strain of constant scarcity started to erode the resolve I had to finish the month. I sat in my tiny, dimly lit room, staring at the ceiling and counting the remaining long days. Every decision felt like a high-stakes gamble, where losing meant going without dinner or missing the bus. The vibrant energy of the city now felt like a taunt, mocking my inability to participate fully. I clutched my thin blanket, trying to ignore the draft creeping through the window of my apartment. The silence of the room was heavy, filled only by the distant, uncaring hum of the metropolis. I realized that survival was not just about money, but about the constant, draining mental exhaustion involved. Each day felt like an eternity, a slow march toward an uncertain finish line I desperately needed. I looked at my reflection in the window, seeing a stranger worn down by the relentless pressure. The dream of the experiment was fading, replaced by the raw, biting reality of living on nothing. I forced myself to stand, preparing for another day of walking miles to save a few pennies. The city moved on around me, indifferent to the struggle unfolding within my own small, quiet life. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves for the challenges that the next sunrise would bring. The experiment was no longer a game. It was a battle for dignity in a harsh world. My stomach tightened as I opened the pantry, finding only a handful of dry, flavorless crackers remaining. I carefully rationed the water, knowing that even the utility bill was a looming, terrifying financial threat. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store glared down, highlighting the stark contrast between my needs and means. I bypassed the fresh produce section, my eyes lingering on vibrant greens I could no longer afford. Instead, I grabbed the cheapest bag of rice, a staple that would serve as my only sustenance. Walking home, the wind whipped through my thin jacket, reminding me that winter was closing in fast. My shoes, worn thin at the soles, offered little protection against the jagged edges of the concrete. I passed a group of laughing friends entering a restaurant, their joy feeling like a distant, unreachable memory. The smell of roasting meat wafted through the air, taunting my senses and sharpening my deep hunger. I quickened my pace, desperate to reach the safety of my room before the darkness fully descended. Inside, the radiator hissed a rhythmic, mocking sound, failing to provide any real warmth to the space. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, shivering as I sat on the edge of my bed. The darkness of the room mirrored the uncertainty that now clouded every thought I dared to have. I checked my notebook, tallying the remaining balance with shaking hands, praying for a mathematical miracle. The numbers refused to change, staring back at me with a cold, unyielding, and brutal finality today. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize a future where these 30 days were just a distant memory. But the present moment was a heavy anchor, dragging me down into the depths of my exhaustion. I wondered if anyone else in these towering buildings was fighting this same invisible, quiet, desperate war. The city lights twinkled outside, a beautiful tapestry that hid the suffering of those living beneath them. I felt a surge of anger, then a wave of profound sadness, washing over my tired, aching frame. My phone screen lit up with a notification, a reminder of a bill I could not pay. I swiped it away, choosing to ignore the digital pressure that mirrored the physical weight of poverty. Sleep was the only escape, a temporary reprieve from the relentless, grinding gears of this urban machine. I lay back, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance, a soundtrack to my fragile existence. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch and grow, reflecting the magnitude of my mounting anxiety. I whispered a promise to myself, a vow to endure until the final second of the month. The struggle was no longer about proving a point. It was about reclaiming my own inner strength. I drifted into a light, fitful sleep, dreaming of warmth and a table filled with abundant food. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another mile to walk, and another day of this grueling, hard test. I was ready to face it, knowing that my resilience was the only currency I had left. As the first 2 weeks bled into the third, the physical and mental toll deepened. The final stretch of the month was defined by a desperate scramble for basic survival. Keeping the lights on and the stomach full became an all-consuming, daily, frantic battle. A minor unexpected expense, a broken transit pass, threatened to derail the entire month's endeavor. This sudden failure forced a cruel choice between skipping essential meals or walking miles. I chose to walk, trudging through the freezing rain as the city lights blurred ahead. This period of intense pressure revealed the systemic fragility of living on the very edge. It is a precarious existence where one small misfortune can cascade into a total collapse. Every step in the rain felt like a heavy metaphor for the crushing weight endured. My shoes were soaked, and the cold seeped into my bones, mirroring my inner exhaustion. By the 30th day, the exhaustion was absolute, settling deep into my very marrow. Yet, the perspective I gained during these grueling weeks was truly, undeniably, and profoundly invaluable. Surviving on minimum wage was not merely a simple test of strict personal monthly budgeting. It was a profound confrontation with the invisible barriers that keep millions trapped daily. These barriers are rigid, silent, and often ignored by those who have never faced them. They trap people in a relentless, unforgiving cycle of subsistence that offers no easy escape. Emerging from the experiment, the return to a normal life felt strange and surreal. My apartment felt too large, the silence too heavy, and the food too abundant. The experience was shadowed by the lingering weight of the struggle I had just endured. I looked at the city skyline, no longer seeing a playground of endless, bright opportunity. Instead, I saw the hidden machinery of survival that keeps the metropolis running for some. A newfound, permanent empathy for those who live this reality every single day took root. The experiment had ended, but the lessons learned were etched into my consciousness forevermore. I realized that poverty is not a lack of effort, but a lack of options. The cycle of scarcity is a cage built by systemic forces beyond any individual control. Walking through the grocery store, I felt a strange guilt at the sight of abundance. The prices on the label seemed like taunts, reminding me of the math I performed. Every item was a trade-off, a sacrifice, a piece of a life stretched too thin. I understood now why the isolation of poverty is so pervasive and so deeply damaging. It strips away the social fabric, leaving the individual to face the world entirely alone. The indifference of the city was not a bug, but a feature of the system. It was designed to keep the gears turning while the people were grounded to dust. My resolve had been tested, eroded, and ultimately transformed into a quiet, burning, righteous anger. I would never look at a minimum wage worker the same way ever again today. They are the silent heroes of a system that refuses to acknowledge their immense sacrifice. The 30 days were over, but the journey toward understanding had only just begun now. I sat in my chair, watching the sunset over the cold, indifferent urban landscape. The lights flickered on, one by one, across the vast, sprawling expanse of the city. Each light represented a life, a struggle, a story of survival hidden in the dark. I felt the weight of that collective struggle pressing against the glass of my window. The experiment was a success, not because I survived, but because I finally truly saw. I saw the reality that millions face, a reality that is often hidden in plain sight. The barriers are real, they are high, and they are built to keep people down. Breaking them requires more than just individual effort. It requires a fundamental, systemic, societal shift. I closed my eyes, the exhaustion still clinging to me like a heavy, damp shroud. The memory of the rain, the hunger, and the cold remained vivid and very sharp. It was a reminder of the fragility of the life I had taken for granted. I promised myself that I would not let this empathy fade with the passing time. The struggle of the minimum wage worker is a struggle for dignity and basic humanity. It is a struggle that deserves to be heard, understood, and ultimately, fully and completely. The city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the lessons I had just learned today. But I was changed, and that change was the most important outcome of the month. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at the street below me. People were moving, working, living, and struggling, just as I had done for 30 days. I felt a connection to them, a bond forged in the fires of shared hardship. The experiment was over, but the reality of the minimum wage remained for so many. I would carry this knowledge with me, a burden and a gift, in equal measure. The city was a landscape of survival, but it was also a place of hope. If we could see the barriers, perhaps we could eventually find a way to break. The experiment was finished, but the true work of change was only just beginning now.